Thank you guys so much for joining me yet again for another episode of Keeping It Real with America's Supermom. Excited about my next guest. We actually met through a mutual connection, and I'm happy to be here to have a conversation. I have David Hennessey with me, and he is coming to us from across the globe in France. So, we are going to be getting into some great conversation. But before we get started, I want to give David the opportunity to introduce himself.
Hello, Lachelle, and everybody else that's listening. Yes, I'm David Hennessey, and I'm located in the south of France. If people need to know a little bit about where exactly I am, it's close to Nîmes in the south of France. And Nîmes is an old Roman city that actually still has buildings that are in better condition than some of the more recent buildings. It's quite amazing. And I would like to share with yourselves today, perhaps a little bit about the holistic personal development program I created 20 years ago called the Wonder Technique.
Love that. And so we're just going to dive right into that because, I love holistic mindsets and just being able to look at the world through a different set of eyes. So, talk to us about this technique. How did you get started? I know sometimes with some of these topics, it's hard to fit it all into 30 minutes, but we just will go over some of the highlights.
Okay, for sure. A little bit of the history of the Wonder Technique. It's 20
Mhm.
years old, so it's out of its teenage years, shall we say, and it's constantly evolving. Originally, the inspiration came and motivated me after my mom had gone through cancer, and I'd spent time with her during the process of her going with other people too, as well, to medical practitioners, doctors, nutritionists, naturopaths, and what my assistance in the situation was to help decode things and make things easier and simpler for my mom to understand. And after my mom recovered, and she's still many years later doing very well recovered, and that was actually in the 90s to put things in perspective.
Wow.
Yeah, Michelle, it really, and I realized that I had always had a great capacity to simplify complex things.
Hmm.
And ever since a little kid, and that was because I was always and still am very curious. And I started to assemble the information about health and wellness and looking for common things in terms of what makes us happy, what makes us healthy, and how can I accumulate core principles that everybody can use. And over the last 20 years, there's been thousands of people that I've met in person and worked with. And now I'm doing more work online because of the circumstance in the world. But what was really quite interesting is that I see consistently the same patterns as to what really helps us be healthier and be happier.
I love that. And I love what you said about simplify complex things. That's amazing. So talk to us about some of these things that maybe they're complex, but we just can look at them from a different set of eyes to simplify
Okay.
them.
Okay, for sure. Thank you, Michelle. One of the things that recently has popped up in other different conversations I've had is how, as human beings, we often look for the most complex solution to something instead of the simplest one. And I'm not really sure why.
Hmm.
For example, I'll have people contact me, whether it's professionally or if it's friends, we will connect and they'll tell me about a situation that's been quite challenging for them. And in terms of relationships, a really simple example, they'll say that I'm very stressed out. I've had a bad experience with somebody. Conversation didn't go well. And now I am not sure what to do. And I will ask them, when is the last time you spoke to the person? And often it's not just hours or days, it could be weeks. And what happens is we have a tendency to build up over time, and of course, we're never the same as anybody else. We tend to build up all the negative things in our mind, and we're lost as to how do we re-engage with that person. And simply put, I really believe that we have to engage a conversation if we've had a conflict with somebody by just leaving it that the opportunity is still open.
Hmm.
And probably the best approach, when somebody asked me recently on a podcast, they said they were having a challenge with the conversation they had with somebody. They felt it didn't have the same energy that they felt, that they'd always had, and they weren't sure how to start the conversation. And my suggestion, keeping it simple, was why don't you contact the person and ask them how they feel about the relationship you have. Now, this can be on a
Mm,
professional level. You can say, how have I been serving you? How have I been taking care of you in the business? Or on a personal level, you know what? I want to make sure that, I'm being a great friend. Like, tell me more, or spouse, or whatever it is you want to say. Leave it to them to open the conversation because perhaps, Michelle, it's all in our own minds. They're doing
mm,
wonderful. They're doing great. And just at that moment in time, when you had that last interaction with them, you had brought a lot into the conversation, as we all do, our history to that moment in time, and you framed the experience very different from then.
that is so good. I had a class earlier today on Clubhouse, and
Okay.
we had someone share about anxiety. And so she mentioned that she went to this job interview with this great company, and she was having the interview with the owner. And the owner asked her a question. She hyperventilated. She was trying to talk, nothing was coming out of her mouth. And so he just abruptly says, "Oh, I have to take this phone call. I'll call you. I'll have you come back in when I get done." So she goes to the bathroom, gets herself calmed down, washes off her face, goes out. She's about to leave, like just be like, "Oh, I blew it." The receptionist says, "Come on back in. He's ready to see you now."
Okay.
And she goes in there, has a great interview, and after the whole little scenario, she tells the individual what happened. He didn't even notice because he was on his phone. So she had created this story in her own head, like, I'm looking like an idiot. She was about to walk away from that opportunity because of the what she created in her own mind. So
Exactly.
that is so true. Now, what do you think that we need to really be mindful of to kind of stop that type of behavior? Because it is something that is done commonly across the board when it comes to personal relationships, business. I mean, interacting with your kids. I mean, the list goes on and on about these scenarios that we play. How do we stop that from the
Okay.
beginning?
Okay. On my part, although I'm a work in progress all the time, I do my very best. I have to put it in perspective. I was born in Ireland, and the history of Irish men is we're not super communicators. And
Mm,
I've always decided that I wanted to work on being a communicator as best I can. So perhaps there's moments when I over communicate, but I really work on sharing what's on my mind. And I really adore when other people, they take the time to explain things to me. For example, in my case, if I have an interaction with my children,
mhm,
and or even like just when I'm around and I'm in a different mental space, like I'm occupied with something. It might be a project,
mhm,
it might be something else that's happened before one of my children comes home. I will say to them, just so you know, if I'm coming across a little bit strange or whatever, it's because I've got something else going on in my mind.
mm,
And that preempts them potentially, of course, I can never control someone else's mind, preempts them thinking, oh, dad is upset at me. Because often
right.
children will think that. Often we think
Mhm,
that someone else is because they're in a certain mind. And I've had the pleasure recently with some people that I've met where they actually do that. Like I was out rock climbing, and this friend of mine, she said to me, just in case you think I'm acting a little bit unusual here, it's because I'm a bit scared of heights. And
mm,
and that because the way she was acting, I had no idea, and I hadn't
mhm,
really thought about it because I wasn't
mhm,
aware of it, but she was communicating from her side. So in our own side, we can actually help other people understand us better if we take the time simply to share with people where we are at. If you
mhm,
come home from work, you can say this to the people that are home, what, have a difficult day, or if people are at home, if they've had a difficult day, if they express that to you, you actually preempt the situation because you've said why you might be needing a bit of headspace.
mm.
So it sounds
I
very simple. I mean, it takes practice. So this is everything takes practice, but it gets better over
mhm.
time.
Yeah, and I think, that's a good point because, let's just say, showing up for an interview, right? You're showing up for an interview or podcasts or whatever, and people are expecting you to bring a certain energy. a certain mindset to the conversation. So when you do take that moment, what do you recommend? Do you just say, well, I'm not going to be my usual self? Or, how do you handle that? Because so many people wear a mask instead of dealing with the issue.
Oh, this is a great question, and I love this that you mentioned about wearing a mask in terms of
Mhm,
they move. When I was younger, I was always told that you should move. So at home, you're one person. At work, you're a
mhm,
different person. With your friends, you're a different person. I found that, Michelle, very stressful. I never
mhm,
was able to deal with that environment. So I decided a long time ago, my life will be so much easier if I am myself wherever I am. So this
mhm,
kind of conversation we're having, it's the same conversation I would have with other people in the sense that I don't become a different person. I
mm,
am still myself. Now, when
mhm,
you're going to prepare for an interview, there's something really interesting. Or you know what? You could be going out on the first date. There's all the moments where you're meeting somebody new, a new opportunity in your life. And we sometimes confuse the emotion. Hello there. We sometimes confuse the emotion with excitement with anxiety or nervousness. Our heart speeds up. You know what? That's when we're nervous, but also when we're excited.
mhm,
You know what? We may start to sweat a little bit. We're nervous. We're excited. We confuse. Why not think of the emotion that I'm actually really excited? You could literally walk into an interview and you're there because you want to be there. So you might say to the interviewer, you know what? I'm really excited about this opportunity. I may come across nervous. It's because I'm excited. That would be a
mm.
positive reframing
That
of the
is.
experience for yourself because you're talking about yourself. And it also would be more positive for the interviewer to see because if people perceive nervousness, they might perceive that you don't think you're qualified for the job and you're trying to put on a facade. But if you're excited, that's a completely different framework that you're putting for yourself and for them as a reference point. And in fact, chances are you're being honest. You are excited. Why would you be there? You know,
Right.
when I talk to people about goal setting and planning things in their lives, who in their right mind would actually plan a goal that is not a goal that they want to achieve? If you are not
Mm,
motivated for a goal that you've decided on, then it's not your goal.
mm. That's good. I love that. And I love the way that you mentioned, reframing because, we want to focus on the positive,
Yes.
at least I do.
Yeah,
So you could definitely be fearful or you could be excited, so you're kind of telling yourself with intention how you want that to play out
exactly.
and expressing that to other people. That's good. I mean, like you're right. These are simple things, but it's complex because we think that it has to be some grand production. It's
Exactly.
got to be some $1 million answer to something. And it's just the simple things that kind of leave us stuck where we are because we just don't take that next thing to go a little deeper.
For sure. And I think
Hmm.
as you mentioned about the idea of an interview and in any sort of conversation, we want to do our best to really be in the experience.
Hmm.
So we want to focus on listening. We want to be really listening to the other person and not anticipating, okay, this is how I'm going to answer what they're saying. Because once you start to do that, you're actually leaving the conversation. You may be physically there,
Hmm.
but you're not really there. And this is where you could be in a relationship personal or in a relationship professional, where you either miss the question, what they said, or
Hmm.
miss what the person was saying to you that's in front of you, your spouse, for example. Now, there's one thing to be aware of. If you have a heated discussion, a debate, an argument with somebody, and after the event, you might you might actually wonder, like, what did we get upset about? This is just kind of a little bonus for people that are listening, and I appreciate everybody who is listening. Our
Hmm.
memory is state dependent, meaning that if you have a discussion with somebody, let's call it a heated debate, whatever it is, but you're in a certain type of emotion at that moment in time, your
Hmm.
memory is hooked to that emotional experience and the biological experience that goes along with that. So after you calm down and relax and leave the environment, you might go, "Gosh, I'm glad that's over with. What were we arguing about?" You may not actually be able to remember. Now, this can happen, and it's happened to me, and I'm like, oh gosh, what do I learn from this? So now I understand the state dependent memory. There's two things you can do here is that if you have a discussion with somebody, you can say, okay, I need to take some time before it actually escalates. I need to get some space to calm down. You say, I'll be back in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, whatever it is that you need to leave the discussion. And
Mhm.
then you come back. So then you'll be in the state of mind where you normally reside in a much more calmer way. And you can also leave the discussion and say to the person, I hope we can revisit what's the concern right now when I come back so that you can remember it when you're much calmer.
Mm.
Because if not, there's a very high chance that you won't remember what exactly, and you may hit that same stumbling block again. Now, this is something, for example, I've heard from people in some of the psychological research. If you study all the time with music in the background or a certain environment that you're in, and
Mhm.
your body gets used to that environment for learning and recall. But if you know that when you go to do the exam, you're not going to have your favorite music in the background or a certain environment, you have to prepare yourself for the experience that you'll be having at the time when you need to recall your memory.
Mm.
So
Now,
that's
so what are some ways that we can kind of do that? Because that's a good point. There's
yeah,
always that situation where we make that transition. So you're not saying that we don't have to face that obstacle, but what are some things that we can do to prepare ourselves for that
I would
different
say
environment?
very simply is you have to mimic the environment that you will be in that when you take the particular examination. So
Mm,
if that's for schooling or an interview, because like I say, if you don't have, if you need, for example, music to calm yourself down and stay relaxed while you're studying, but you're not going to have that at the same time in the exam. It's kind
mhm,
of a subtle thing. Work on doing it part of the time where you wanted the music, but work on it with the experience that you'll have in an examination room where it might be total silence. Okay.
mm,
Of course, nowadays we're not moving around so much, so an examination hall is not the same thing. But I'm talking about you want to be in the experience that you're in. So you're training yourself to be that way. For example, when a lot of people will talk about different forms of meditation nowadays, and it's harder from the really experts, shall we say, on calming the mind. They say the hardest thing to do is to calm your mind without using some sort of external tool. It could be a phone application, it could be a candle, it could be a piece of music. But they said once you can learn how to calm your mind without those tools, you'll always have that capacity. And when I heard that, Lachelle, I was like, this makes sense to me. So when I rock climb, I have to be very calm and relaxed, centered in both mind and body. And if I was dependent on something outside of me to keep my mind calm, you're not going to be there. I'm not going to be listening to some or sound or calming sound when I'm up on the rock face. It's too late then. So I train myself in the experience that I'm going to be in when I exercise that activity.
love that. I mean, and that's a great point because, we that's the whole point is being able to respond and perform in the event that we don't have these tools,
Exactly.
right? I mean, when we had the rug pulled out from underneath us with this pandemic, a lot of the tools that we had just went out the window
Yes,
because everything just happened in real time, just overnight, no forecasting or preparation on many people's parts. So, I love that. That is so good. So, so what you're saying is recreating that environment with the actual way that it's going to be done part of the time instead of being so comfortable in being in your own flow and zone in your home.
for sure. And I give you an
Yeah.
example that's quite an interesting example, but I do my best to try and relate it. I met Jim Whittaker, who was the first American to ascend Mount Everest. I met him in 2005.
Hmm.
And Jim ascended Mount Everest in 1963. And he lived in Washington, the state of Washington in the USA. And
Hmm.
I met him actually when I was living in Canada. And I asked him, how did you train for going up Everest? And I'll always remember this. He said, David, I trained by going up and down Mount Washington, Mount Rainier. I trained by doing physical activity. And he said, I never understand, is what he told me, why so many people, they go to the gym, they work weights and everything like that, because, but they're not physically doing the activity that they're going to do. I've always thought about that. So I love hiking as well
Mm.
too. And when I do rock climbing, I train to do rock climbing. Like just using the same example, I do the same thing in my own life where it's what you want to get better at, you're actually practicing it. It's not a side angle that you're taking it in, because for example, with Jim's story about ascending Everest, which is a huge achievement, and I would say it was a lot tougher in 1963 than it was to do it nowadays in terms of equipment and everything. And he said that it's the same physical activity, the same acclimatization, not the same altitude, but your body knows I'm carrying a lot of weight, I'm moving at this speed, I'm building on it, as against I'm in the gym running on a treadmill or lifting weights and that, which is not the same. Like the closest you can get to the actual experience. So again, I'm going around to the same way that if you want to perform, you will perform in that environment. And prior to the pandemic, myself, I did a lot of conference work in person. That's where most of my work has ever been done with the Wonder Technique, and that's where I've shared the most. And really, what trained me to be a better presenter was presenting. I was never really good at, people will say stand in front of a mirror and talk. I was like, I can't do that. It doesn't work for me. But
Mm-hmm.
I worked on it by doing more events and more events. And in that way, it builds your confidence. And I'll
Mm-hmm.
just take a sidebar again.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody in their lives, we're very social people. We love to make new friends. We love to meet new people. And how do you do that? You take the action, the step of going out and approaching people. And you know what? People will say by their expression or by their voice,
Mm-hmm.
they don't want to know us. They don't want to meet us. But don't let that get you down. Just move forward again, say
Mm-hmm.
hi to the next person. And remember that when somebody doesn't say hi to you, because I'm pretty sure you're a great person, you've got lots to share with them, it's because they have their own story that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
You
I
know,
love that. Now that's another simple solution, because so often and I love the whole thing about being a presenter, because you can practice in the mirror, you can get on video and do these things, but there's certain elements of being a presenter that you can't recreate with those type of scenarios. The pause, the asking questions, the certain things that create engagement and response, and make the whole presentation come to life. You can't recreate that with a mirror or a video sometimes. So I love that you would bring that up.
exactly. And actually, Lachelle, what's really interesting about that is that if nowadays we talk about being yourself, being authentic. When I started 20 years ago, I was definitely being myself because I got
Hmm.
up there, and if I was nervous, people, because I was really excited. And for those people who are thinking, I have a message to share, David looks like he's always done this. No, I'm actually a person. When I was super shy, what we call it, when I
Hmm.
was younger, I was
Hmm.
afraid of approaching people. But in
Hmm.
fact, I made a decision again. It's not just a mental decision, but I took action. In my mid-20s, I thought I'm going to be forever alone in my life and never do what I want unless I take the risk of putting myself out and talking to people. I wasn't talking about the Wonder Technique. I was talking about living my life and meeting people and making friends. And I put myself in a uncomfortable zone, but I put myself, the shell in a uncomfortable zone because I anticipated by looking into the future that if I did not make these changes, 5 years, 10 years, or way into the future, I would not be happy. So I use the future as a motivation for taking action nowadays. For people who are wondering, you know what, I'll get around to taking my health in a few years' time. Imagine if you don't, and the compounding negative effect of you not changing your current habits. Maybe you physically incapable of bending over and greeting your grandchildren. Like that's an example I use. Work on it now. Don't wait till later. And now, unfortunately, I meet people younger and younger and younger people in their 20s, 30s who are dealing with health issues. Don't push them aside. Embrace them and take action. Because
Hmm.
it's surprising, actually, there's so much information out there, but if you boil it down, simple actions can make a massive difference on your daily life. Like the idea of walking around the block at a fast pace for 20 minutes once a day can improve your health and well-being. And if you won't take the time to do that, then you'll probably be taking the time to deal with it a different way in the future. So it's not about all the information. And I recently did a video on that. The biggest problem with personal development is because we do have so much information out there. And a lot of people are what I call, and this is something I put into a little ebook that any of your listeners can get at no charge. It's 10 steps to health and happiness. And this particular ebook, one of the things I talk about is avoiding what I call eternal student syndrome, which is where you're constantly learning all the time, seminars, ebooks, listening to podcasts, doing all the stuff, but you're not taking an actual action step.
Mhm.
And you need to do that. Embrace one idea, test it out, see if it works for you. Great if it does, keep doing it. And then, after a period of time that works for you, when you feel you've embraced that habit, add something else in. If you want to change something in your life, I find that the most effective thing that's worked for me and other people that I've shared with and worked with is one idea. One solitary idea is what you want to work on. Don't try and do all kinds of things. If you want to kind of reassure yourself on that, when doctors talk about elimination diets, and stuff, or adding stuff back in, they say one thing at a time. You don't do a whole bunch of things. So if you want to have an impact on your life, by example, see if drinking water, adding it into your diet makes you feel better, just do that. Don't start an exercise program. Don't change your diet. Keep so you can actually see, okay, yeah, this is actually making a difference.
Mhm.
Plus, it's less stressful. You're
Mhm.
just doing one thing at a time.
So true. And and you brought up a good point about the whole concept of being shy and speaking out. So there are many people that are in this space because maybe they were in a certain industry and now they've got to reinvent themselves and change the way that they've done things because of this pandemic. So for somebody who is in that space that you were, a long time ago, you've grown over time and evolved. What advice would you give them that would be an actionable start to kind of navigating through those feelings?
You mean when they have to change it? Can you expand just a little bit more so I don't
Yeah, so
incorrectly
like
answer
when
the question?
someone is
Mhm.
shy, afraid maybe to get on video or, doing something that has them maybe in front of the camera rather than behind it.
Okay. Simply put, I've just listened actually today because I was on a wonderful podcast about a month or so ago with Nicole and Laura called Ask More, Get More. And they had
Mhm,
some people they interviewed today, which with regards to putting themselves out there on video, particularly in the last year where a lot of people couldn't see people in person.
mhm,
And they said people love to see the authenticity of people when they were stumbling, fumbling, trying to get the phone correct in their hand. That we
mhm,
all go through a learning process. We all start as a young child, crawling before we walk, falling down.
mhm,
We know we go through these bumps. No one's going to be an expert. And in fact, when somebody has invested a huge amount in making a video because they've had a lot of support, but the
mhm,
majority of people are just we're work in progress. So I would
mhm,
say embrace, be courageous, and take the opportunity just to go for it if it's a necessary
mhm,
requirement, if it's something you really need to do and something you want to do. Once again, I run back to the idea that if it's not something you really need to do, maybe there's a different avenue for you. Because, like, for example,
mhm,
you can do podcasts where you don't have to show yourself, whatever reason, because people will listen to audio a lot nowadays. So
mhm,
if you feel that in your work, you'll make the difference by doing video, jump on it, give it a shot, and be yourself.
mhm,
Because like when I do my videos, I will say that people look, I don't pre-script it. I have an idea.
mhm,
I turn
mhm,
on the camera and I just go with it.
mhm. I
You'll
love
be
that.
oh,
Simply doing it. I just think that's the case. And, just as you take action, you'll learn and change and navigate along the way. So I love that. This has just been a great conversation. I tell you, 30 minutes goes by quickly when you are deeply engaged with the insights and questions that can come from just, thinking about ways that you can simplify things in your life. I mean, just taking the time to create space for that, I think, is really important because we do have so much noise. And, if you're in a certain industry, you're watching what people in your industry are doing, and comparison really can creep up on you so quickly. So I love that these insights that you've shared. So what is the best way for the audience to get a hold of you?
Thank you, Shelley. It's really simple. TheWonderTechnique.com. That's the best way to find me. Everything is through that website, TheWonderTechnique.com, or David Hennessey, but I'm pretty sure you'll find me through TheWonderTechnique.com. Everything is attached there.
Awesome. And what final words would you like to share with everybody today?
Actually, I have these notifications that pop up in my mind, as I mentioned before. I think when we talked before, as against
Mm-hmm.
on my phone, where they're all turned off. The notification is to remind people to be courageous. Have the courage to be
Mm,
yourself. That little bit of discomfort is okay, because when you're courageous, you will be yourself and you will change the world.
mm.
We all
I
have so
love
much to
that.
give.
I tell you, I mean, you just definitely have been a heavy hitter with some of these simple things that we overlook, but remembering that can really be impactful as you go about your business, personal life. I was stuck in depression for 13 years because I ignored a lot of these simple things that you're saying. And it's so important to have that reality check earlier than later because you miss out on a lot of things by looking at things from the wrong lens, so to speak. It's like someone who's wearing glasses and you go to that eye doctor and get a prescription. You're like, wow, I had no idea I couldn't see all these things.
It's a
So
great analogy, Michelle.
I love that. So this has just been wonderful. I encourage you all who are watching with us to reach out to David, and if something he said resonated, just do that next step. Get on that computer, on your phone, contact him through his website and have a conversation because it's these conversations that can lead to change in our own life. A lot of times we are afraid to make that next step. We're afraid to connect with the heart of the matter, the things that really are the issues that we're dealing with. So if he did resonate with you, reach out and give him a call. And we want to thank you guys so much for watching. And then, David, we just really appreciate your insights and things that you've shared today.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for listening. I value your time. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, everybody, you've heard it here. If you have any questions, put it in the comments, and we will see you guys on the next episode. Bye for now.